the thing is, your relationship with your employee is dependent on you actually fulfilling the obligations of payroll.
The greatest thing you will need to do as a leader is to find out and embrace the leadership of $100 million leader before you're going to be able to get everyone to follow you and bring them there with you.
One of the biggest learnings that I've had recently is that we think people are trained on the skills for the job.
Good day and welcome to the Wealthy Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Bob Govero. It is great to have you here with us. Just before I introduce the special guest that we have in today, I just want to remind you that the Wealthy Entrepreneur Podcast is the place where we dissect the elements that contribute to entrepreneurial success, from mindset and leadership to profits and revenue. Now, this specific episode, we're going to talk about mastering leadership and culture, a conversation with Shrad Rao. Did I say that right?
Yes, you said that perfectly. Thank you.
Excellent. So before I bring Shrad in and we start having these conversations about leadership, because I got to tell you, before we kick this off, mind-blowing conversations about leadership and the challenges of being a CEO. But I want to do a formal introduction. So Shrad is WagePoint's long-suffering CEO, as he describes himself. It's only a partial joke given the intensity of payroll where you have to get everything right all the time. Is that not the truth or what? Knowing how difficult this subject matter is for most small business employers, his approach was building a simple product and backing it by the friendliest, most approachable support in the business. He's come to learn that leadership throws you curveballs even when you think you've mastered all the calls. In his free time, Shrad contemplates how he found himself in this position. I absolutely love that, and I'm excited to welcome Shrad to the show. Shrad, how's everything going?
I'm great, Bob. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. I got to tell you, before we hopped on here, it is not easy building a business. And, you know, I love it when you get it must be nice. Right? It must be nice that you've built this business that has this successful track record and this wonderful brand. It must be nice that you've maybe got the flexibility to work outside during the day or to maybe take a Friday off. But what people don't really understand is what happens behind the scenes. Shrad, tell us the story of how you built up your organization, where you've come from and where you're at today.
Yeah, well, thank you for that intro, Bob. I appreciate it. I mean, look, you know, leadership is a art and a science. And so what's really interesting is that I don't feel like I never seem to learn all the lessons, no matter how many times I go to bat. I seem to find more and more waiting for me at every corner. But yeah, so I started the company just about 12 years ago now. So I've been at this for some time. For me, like, you know, building payroll has always been, the topic itself is, like I said, it's very intense. Like, people generally don't like it. I mean, there's not a lot of people who are like, I love payroll. I wish I could, you know, name my child after it, right? Like, it doesn't really inspire anyone. And at the end of the day, like, if you get it wrong, those consequences are pretty dire, right? Like, I mean,
it's pretty sensitive, right? It's sensitive. It's a sensitive area because every business owner has employees who are negatively sensitive towards payroll. Not positive, just negative.
Yes, just negative. And the thing is, your relationship with your employee is dependent on you actually fulfilling the obligations of payroll. So the relationship itself gets fractured when you have a problem with this in this situation. And given how tenuous all of these relationships can be, you want to avoid it, you know, in anything that you can avoid those relationships getting fractured, you really want to spend time and attention there. So anyway, so I wanted to build something that, you know, I've always loved small businesses. I think they're the best people to work for. And so just being in support of them and building something that was, you know, taking something that's difficult, making it simpler, and then making the conversation around it like two friends were talking, right? Like, imagine if you were calling someone about something you don't know a lot about. You don't know how to describe your problems, for example, but a good friend can help you work through that. And that's essentially what the feeling we wanted from customers. We wanted customers to get when they contacted us. And that included our partners as well. For example, you guys are one of our awesome partners, one of our awesome partners that, you know, you have a bunch of your clients using WagePoint. Obviously, we're super grateful for that. But even when your customers contact us or you contact us, we want you guys to feel like you just have buddies on the other side looking after you, talking about the problem with you. And so the idea was to build the kind of business where every customer would feel like they're our only customer, even if we have 25,000 of them, which is essentially the way we've built the company so far.
Wow. So 25,000 customers. Now, how big is your team?
Well,
these days,
to be honest with you, it ebbs and flows. I don't know the exact number right now, but I'm hazarding around 200.
And, that becomes more difficult to know that exact number as the team gets bigger. I've learned this over the last couple of years. The only reason I tend to know is we use a software called Bamboo that manages a lot of our internal just employee documents and whatnot, and it gives me an employee count. So I have to check it from time to time. So I typically, my answer is, well, it was 105 as of last week, but I'll have to recheck it again this week because I'm not sure, right? It's once you get over 30, it's not overly relevant anymore.
No, I think there's another inflection point somewhere around maybe, I think I've heard 300 or so. And there's a compounding nature to this thing. Like, it gets harder the more people you have, because the reality is you have to galvanize people, right? You have to kind of teach them how to cooperate, collaborate, and coordinate. And they have to do all three of them at an expert level for your company to grow. So when you take any group of people, right, even like a small basketball team of 5 people, or you still have those 3 C's, and those are hard to do with 5 people. So now when you keep compounding that, like sometimes I was listening to Indira Nooyi, the ex-CEO of Pepsi, and she had 300,000 people working under her. And I was like, barf, right? like how could you even live in that? It's like a small country, right? So anyway, so yeah, just thinking about that makes me feel a little sick inside. But
I was just thinking about hitting leave on this podcast.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because there's real challenges to this thing. And there's a very big difference between doing leadership and then doing it really well. And when you have to do it really, really well, it's very, very hard. It's way harder than most people realize.
And so you've been in this for a few years. You've built up an incredible team. From our experience working with your team has been nothing but enjoyable and seamless, which is fantastic. What is your intention with WagePoint as you're moving forward? Like, I understand you guys have had some pretty high growth, and so where do you want to take this baby?
Well, so here's the thing, like we were having very high growth, but recently it's been starting to get a little bit harder to do the things that I expect from a high growth company. And this is what you and I were talking about just before you hit play on the podcast. So my style of leadership has typically been, let's be honest, okay? None of us really want to work for a living all day long. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't like to pretend that this is the purpose of our life, right? But what we can do is we can view work as a place of growth, right? Where we experience challenges in a very in a very contained way. You're experiencing things, like you said, right? Confrontation, something that you might not love, but now you're forced to do it and you're forced to grow in that direction, right? But it's still safe, right? Like, you're not going to get killed because you've confronted someone, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully not. Geez, those are some rough confrontations.
Yes, exactly. So, but the thing is that you get the practice, you work the muscle and all that other stuff. So work is very much I'm not one of those let's change the world kind of guys. I'm like, let's change our internal experience of the world. Let's actually grow from a subjective point of view and sort of accept that challenge in life is hard. And this is just it's kind of a safe way to give feedback. For example, like if you go on the street and you try to give someone feedback, you're probably going to get the backhand of, their palm, right? But in a company, both parties are sort of forced to give and take it in a way that's measured and reasonable. And that's a good thing. It actually teaches us how to do it in life too. So it's always been I'm not like I said, I'm not like the guys who go on the TechCrunch stage and says, that's it, we're going to change the world. I'm more like I said, let's change our inner experience. But then recently what I've been thinking is, like, when I say that, what I'm really doing is I believe I'm talking to people who are seeing the problem the same way, as I am. But most people don't do that. They don't actually see it like that, but they see it as a place where they are coming to get something from the situation. And growth is not always the top of thing, the thing that is top of mind. So we've made, I would say, a series of mistakes, particularly starting with hiring, just hiring people without that growth mindset. And that alone has cost us quite significantly, I think, in terms of like our momentum. Like we were one of those companies that were like doubling every year until just recently when I just wasn't seeing that same momentum. And I'd say that just not focusing on that, hiring people who care about growth mindset has been probably one of the big lessons learned for me. And so my leadership has gone from, or my thinking around leadership has gone from sort of being realistic about it, which is like, what are we really all here to do, to switching it to the idea of saying, well, how do I bring people through the continuum from within themselves to like where they bring out the best in them? How do I actually bring the best? How do I take the potential that someone has and actually pull it out of them with their help, of course, with their assistance, with their consensus? But how do I actually bring out the best in a person? And that has become my new sort of mantra, my new mandate. And doing that is literally 1,000 times harder than I think I would have imagined in the past, because it requires you to kind of bring awareness to the problem. You got to get their buy-in. You got to like actually work there. Like you have to teach them how to empower themselves. And that is a very, very complicated thing to do. But I've started to realize that is the only way to keep sustained growth in the company. You need to create people who think exponentially so that the entire business continues to grow exponentially. And so to do that, you need to find people who want to think exponentially or want to be led in that direction. So you got to change the players and you got to change the game. And that's what I've been thinking about very, very recently.
Yeah, and just we were chatting again right before we jumped on, saying, we've kind of gone through a similar transformation. A part of ours was a little bit more forced than yours. Well, in a different way, maybe in a different way. So we acquired a company which you might have had experience with in Volta a few years ago, and bringing two cultures that were very similar, but one was a remote sort of environment and one was a virtual environment, and that was a pretty drastic change. So we had to go back through and reinvent who we are and what is important to us. And one of the core values that really ties into what you were talking about was choose opportunity, so that we're always thinking about what the next level of growth and innovation could look like as a business. And really for us, we defined that. I almost actually went at this backwards, Shrad, because, as much as I read all these books on leadership, I don't know, I feel like everybody's got to adapt it in their own way. So when I was going through these core values, I was more so identifying the behaviors and the outcomes that I didn't want to have happen. And one of them was I did not want to have a stale environment that wasn't embracing growth and change and innovation. So I was like, well, what do we do? How do we define that? Well, we reverse engineered it and said, well, choosing opportunity is just something that is part of who we are. So anyway, I completely understand. And, one of the interesting conversations that I had with a good friend and colleague who's built a few companies and exited, he said to me one time over dinner, he said, well, what is it that, you want to accomplish? And I was sharing some pretty lofty goals, and I share pretty openly that we want to get to be $100 million professional services firm. And he said, okay, well, do you know what it takes to be a leader of $100 million enterprise? And I said, no, like I'm barely hanging on now. And he said, the greatest thing you will need to do as a leader is to find out and embrace the leadership of $100 million leader before you're going to be able to get everyone to follow you and bring them there with you. I was like, oh man, that sounds like a lot of work. And you're embracing that in reality right now too.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's what I mean. Like you have to keep redefining what you think of as leadership. Like there's no book for this really. Like it's everyone's experience of that situation. But until you step in the seat, it's sort of like, that Game of Thrones moment where like, the king is moving towards the throne and sitting on there. Until you actually sit in that seat, you have no idea what it's like. And nobody on the outside world can tell you this. Because the thing is that, like, for me, I've always been like, the guy who I want to be your friend, right? And you can't do that the same way when you're in the seat. You can be friendly, but you can't be someone's friend. So recently I've been telling people, look, I want you to understand that I want us to become a high performance sports team. Like, I want us to be like that. And just like that, we're going to have sometimes competitive tension between us, or, like whatever, like we're our ideas. I mean, like, you're going to have to compete for the best ideas. And I'm fine with putting my own, I don't have to be like the guy who has the best ideas in the room. I just want us to compete on the best ideas so that the best idea emerges, right?
And that the team's winning.
Yeah. So, but if we settle in our, if we settle, right, then you just don't have that in the end of the day. Like, you don't push each other. So you have to, like, when you're friendly, then you tend to go like, don't worry about it, right? But when you're like friendly and competitive, then you're actually pushing each other far beyond what's comfortable for both parties. And that's really what I think about my executive team. That's what I'm pushing them to do right now. And I would say, by and large, I'd say they're grateful for it. This is the other thing that was a bit surprising. Like, you would think that they want the buddy, but they actually want the leader. And because they want to be better at what they do, right? And so what you're doing is you have to be the example. Like, people say this all the time, right? You hear this, be the example, set the example as the leader. And you don't really, again, know what that means until you see people following your example. And then you say, oh shit, if I don't do something different and if I don't set the bar, they're never going to meet that bar. So you have to now start becoming everything that you want them to be. And that part is the part that's work. Because what most people think that happens is, you think that you're going to be the leader and then other people are going to do the work, right? But actually, you have to do most of the work and they will come close to you, essentially. So that's the part that's the hardest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know. And you know what? It's funny because my wife and I have these conversations all the time. Well, maybe not all the time. They used to happen more frequently, where she would be like, what part of building this team, of 100+ people, wouldn't that mean that you would have to do less of the work?
Yes.
And right. And I would be like, well, yes, I am doing a less percentage of the work, but my role is not getting less work. It's actually becoming more intense. And yes, it may be less, accounting work, and it may be less software development or working on code related to how things are working, but it doesn't mean that the intensity and the importance of the role is changing. In fact, it's probably getting more difficult, more challenging. And, I don't see that going anywhere but up.
Yes. Well, and that's the thing, like, your capacity to change has to be almost endless, right? Because it's like you are the eagle soaring above the forest. And so you have no limit to how high you can fly. Like, you have to be able to continue to go. And in this case, the forest is growing vertically for some reason, in my analogy. But essentially, that's kind of the idea. Is like, you have to stay on top of the problems, or on top of the set of problems that you see. And the thing is an intellectual game. It's an intellectual puzzle, because you have all, like, I was at the Amazon's office in Paris last year, and I was talking to them about something, and they told me, we really want to do this initiative, but the thing is, we don't have the resources. And I just burst out laughing, because I was like, see, now here's Amazon, right, saying that they don't have the resources for something. And so the thing is, like, anytime my team comes and says, we want to do something, but we don't have the resources, I always think about Amazon, because I'm like, see, the thing is, this will never end. like you could be the size of Amazon and you will still not have the resources that you need. So now the question is, what can you do with what you have, right? Usually, and here's the other thing. I don't know if you've experienced this, but one of the biggest learnings that I've had recently is that we think people are trained on the skills for the job, but what they're not, so they may be trained on, like, how to move an Excel cell from the copy and paste from one thing to another. But what they're not taught is how to delegate, how to do alignment building, how to get buy-in, how to do change management. Like if you're introducing a new process, how do you actually introduce it in a way that you actually get the buy-in from everyone, you get the desire to change actually stoked? How do you actually work those problems? So I don't know if we've started to do actual like behavior training or like skills training based on behaviors and mindset training. And both of those things are making far bigger difference than any sort of individual skill that you can cultivate. Have you guys been doing training of that nature? Like how do you delegate? How do you do alignment setting and stuff like that? Have you done things like that in your practice?
Yeah, we've started, and I think it's finding the sweet spot on how to do it the most effective way. Because what we did, and just like we were talking about before, you guys have a bunch of progressive, innovative roles for the new modern organization, right? So we had a culture coach that we brought in that was working with people one-on-one. And it was great. Half the team maybe was taking advantage, not taking advantage in a bad way, but utilizing this resource. And it was working tremendously for them. However, once we started changing the rules of accountability and we were making, the individual leaders in each department more responsible for outcomes, all of a sudden you have a culture coach that's telling employees or team members to do one thing, and then you've got the team leader who's trying to get them to do something else. So there was like conflicting guidance on this. And it was all of a sudden I went, okay, this doesn't work anymore. So we scrap that and we look at the next iteration and say, well, how can we do this, still get the benefits of what we were intending to do, but also support the accountability and outcomes of each of the team leaders?
You have hit it right on the head. So this is the thing, right? Culture is all the soft stuff. It has become all the soft stuff. It's the well-being, it's the, taking care of your employees and all that other stuff. And those things are important. Experience that the employee has with you, that's what the focus is on all the time. That's what culture gets equivocated to. But what it is a combination of the well-being and the performance. Okay. And so somehow over time, the performance has just fallen off the list. And now it's all about the well-being. And the issue with that is that you don't work in, like, we are here to do a collective enterprise, right? It's like we've been given a parcel of land and we have to cultivate it. Now, if one person is busy cultivating or, sowing the seed and another person is sleeping somewhere underneath the tree, over time, somebody's not eating, right? And the reason I'm so bullish on this recently is because our culture has become that. At WagePoint, like we have overcorrected in the direction of like employee well-being and human well-being. And that sounds crazy when you say overcorrected, but the thing is, we're still sort of within a capitalist framework. So without that other side of it, you only end up having one of those pillars met. And it really has to be a balance of both, because otherwise you don't actually have anything like accountability and ownership. Everyone, like if I tell you some horror stories, my man, like we are so soft as a company that there are people who have missed their targets for 2 years and we haven't done anything about it until recently when we finally did something about it. And even those people are like, you know what, it's fair that you did something about it.
For sure. Yeah. Well, and truthfully, that's sort of the play that we've had to go through over the last couple of years, because as a smaller organization, not maybe is necessary, right? Where there's people can step in and ensure that different people are hitting their goals or that departments are hitting their goals. But as the team grows, it's a shared responsibility, and it's not one that I can, really move the needle on anymore. And I used to say, I would be happy to put everybody on my back and get them across the finish line, but that's not the case anymore. And
no, you depend on other people to help you accomplish those goals.
Yeah. And to your point, I think there's a discussion that always needs to be had. And I would say we potentially overcorrected as well. But I think that was maybe a COVID sort of sense that everybody needed that sense of security and well-being needed to be taken care of. So as leaders, compassionate leaders, we just did that. And we focused on that versus, oh, wait a minute, we actually have to create a sustainable environment so that the organization will survive instead of just focusing on making sure that everybody was okay, because that was the time we went through. And we kind of did that too. We had to pull it back and say, okay, now everybody's good, right? Everybody's feeling good. Okay, now we've got to get back to business here. And here is the responsibilities and the targets that we are going to put in place and that we're going to enforce, because it has to happen for everyone to continue to feel good and have that well-being taken care of. We need to hit these targets. Otherwise, the whole thing falls off the wayside.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you, but mine wasn't COVID related. Mine was, or any sort of trigger, I guess. It was, I've always thought that if you do the right thing, the other person will do that too.
Sorry to hear that you were wrong.
Me too. I won't lie. There's a part of me that's disappointed in this. But I also think that it's not fully on them, because if we don't set expectations clearly and if we don't communicate them on a regular basis, they may think they're doing the world's most bang up job, right? So what I was telling you earlier is that when you look at our org chart, we have everything that you would need to succeed. Like we have all the positions that positions that are progressive positions that are very transactional, but with good people and all. We have all of it.
Share some of those roles and what they look like, because I think this is an evolution of an organization that really has created a caring, successful culture that is now just going back to the accountability part of it and saying this too is also important. But maybe share some of the titles of what those roles look like, because I think it's important for people to hear that.
Well, so at one point we had an employee experience specialist, and their entire job was to work on the emotional intelligence part from a company standpoint, right? Basically teach self-awareness and self-regulation and things like that. And then you have a learning and development person, for example. And I know it's used to people inside of that space, but we have, like I said, on paper, we have everything that you would need for a successful organization. And the thing is that when you actually start seeing what people do, how they do their work, that looks very different. So just using recruitment as an example, okay? Where you source candidates is going to matter quite a bit, okay? Now, if you source candidates if you're okay, I'm going to go to LinkedIn and do some outreach, and I'm going to put up a job post, and then I'm going to wait for people to come to me. Let's say those are your two sources. Is that really the same as going to a place that high growth people already live and exist, right? So, you imagine you sponsor a meetup. You just buy coffee for everyone at a meetup, but everyone at that meetup has shown up for growing themselves. Now the pool of candidates that you're hunting in has changed quite significantly, right? Because now you're not just getting people off the internet or people you don't know anything about. If you go to a place where those people have the growth focused people have self-selected into that area, now suddenly you've changed you have at least one very important dimension. So recruiting one version versus the other version gives you very different results. So what I find, and obviously I'm Canadian, I'm also American, so at this point I could I'd be equally discriminatory about both countries. The truth is that I don't think that Canadian talent, and maybe even the US talent to some extent, but I think the population size just makes it harder to say definitively. But in Canada, I feel like the productivity problem that we have is very much tied to how well we understand our jobs, from the difference between doing it and doing it extremely well. So if you're going to be a recruiter, for example, okay, a talent acquisition specialist, and if you want to look for if the mandate of the company is to go for high growth potential, people with high growth potential, or people who are very internally motivated to grow, you're going to have to go hunt, quote unquote, in the grounds and places where those people live, not the general internet, but that specific. You want to go to LinkedIn forums where that might be the case, or you have to figure out how to get into those communities. You can't be like, please let me in. They'll just be like, no, now what are you going to do, right? You got to hustle to figure out how to do it in a way that's still kind of good for them and good for you, right? And then let's say that now you have to test them when they've come into your, before they're going to come into your organization. The way we've been hiring, Bob, is my favorite way. And I'm totally being sarcastic when I say that. Hey, Bob, you look like a good person. Come hang out with us. Yeah. Yeah. So instead of doing what we should be doing, which is what are the things that we need to understand about what Bob will have to do when he comes here, he'll have to, maybe his role will require some delegation or some alignment setting or whatever. How do we test for critical thinking? How do we test for, decision making? And how do we test in a way that's still interesting? So we started to do this stuff more, and it's the difference between like literally like getting the right candidate and the worst candidate in the seat. So when you start thinking about this, what I'm saying is that in Canada, at least in my experience, and it's been like 12 years, so it's somewhat significant.
It's not fresh. Yeah.
It's not fresh. There are very few people who actually know how to do the job extremely well. They know how to do some aspects of the job, but doing the job and doing it well are so markedly different that we have to now understand the person that we've just inherited or just got into the company. Where are they at? How far are they away from what we expected? And those 3-month probation periods, like right now, again, the way we've handled it is we're like, okay, I guess they've passed. Versus what does the 30 days look like? What does 60 days look like? What does 90 days look like? So almost all of our mistakes have happened, have come down to understanding how to put, what does actual structure look like and what does the follow through on that actually look like? So the reason I say all of this is so that any person listening to this podcast and hears about leadership and they think, I think I could do that. What you're going to find is that no matter how many times you have tried to solve a problem, you have to go back to that problem continuously. As long as you keep adding people to your team, you got to keep working the problem differently every single time. So that iterative style of building a company where you're iterating your own leadership, that is essentially, I think, the core of a high growth company. You have to iterate everything that you're doing continuously. And that is where the exhaustion comes from. And that's why you feel so tired, right? It's motivating too. Like, don't get me wrong, like there's lots of things that are very inspiring about it. Like you grow yourself, you watch other people succeed. It's quite rewarding. But that's the balance of it, is that your energy is going to that iteration.
And I like that too. And I would say, if I'm paraphrasing, the problems don't change, but the solutions and how we solve those problems will. And, it's super interesting to think of it that way because it's true, right? In the organization, it's the same problems that come up over and over because those solutions no longer work. And now it's our job to find out the next solution to solve the problem.
But also I would say that the problem, the center of gravity of the problem changes a bit too. Like, so what I mean by that is, there's this idea of solving the right problem. And the right problem tends to be something where you have low effort and high impact. That's what you're looking for. You're looking to do the least amount of work to get the highest reward. That's the game. But if you don't teach people how to do that, and now at 200 people, everyone has to do that. Because otherwise you have incremental gain. You don't have exponential gain. And high growth companies are all about exponential gain. So the idea is to teach everyone to solve the right problem. So when you start to break this down, there's so many facets to getting it right and any one of them you fuck up on, so to speak. Sorry about that. I don't know if that's allowed on your podcast, but any one of them, I'm on a tear these days for some reason. But any one of them you get wrong, and it's sort of like an algorithm. You're going to have, the outcome is going to be impacted by the fact that you've missed somewhere. So yeah, it's this is an esoteric conversation. Obviously, we're not giving strategies. We're just talking about it's very difficult to call yourself a master at leadership. I'd say maybe there's a handful of people who think they are masters, or they may actually be masters, but in reality, it's just an endless cycle of punishing growth for you and everyone around you.
And truthfully, right? You might be having exceptional leadership success in the moment, but tomorrow's a new day with the same problems needing a different solution.
Oh my God, you're So right, Bob. I've had those like, woohoo, I'm doing an awesome job moment.
Today's my day. And the next day you're going, oh my God, I need my inspirational videos or podcasts or something to listen to pick me up. Yeah.
Exactly. But I mean, look, I still recommend it for people. Like, I still think that, like, going into leadership, either as an entrepreneur or even a manager, those are all very, very good things for you, because it's like you get forced to grow up, like some of your notions get challenged. You experience hard, like, the first time that you have an employee that sends a complaint against you, whatever, like, or whatever it is, like, so they complain to your boss about you. That's the first time that you kind of realize, whoa, this is actually a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. So all of that stuff, it kind of, it makes you better just by the sheer effort of having to work through it.
Absolutely. Shrad, I could talk to you all day. I know we've got a tight time constraint here. I'm going to have you back. If you're open to it, let's do this again. Let's have some leadership banter another time as well. But in the meantime, how can people get a hold of WagePoint? How can they learn more about WagePoint and what you guys are doing to help people with their payroll needs?
Well, so wagepoint.com is obviously is our domain. So that's where one place you would find us. But the other thing that we've been thinking about a lot about is, how do we actually serve our customers differently than we do today? So one of the things that we are looking to do is, all of the coaching that we're doing internally that we're finding very effective, we're thinking of turning that coaching outward and actually teaching our customers, and just to teaching them how to do some of the really the stuff that you actually need in your job that no one actually teaches you. And that could be delegation. It could be alignment building. There's a lot of things that we have got planned. So I would say that would be, we would love to see more people, or people start taking us up and actually showing up to some of the webinars and sessions that we have planned. It hasn't officially kicked off, but once we do start kicking this off, what we've found is that this coaching that we're doing inside of the company is so effective that it is almost shocking to me that we don't see this kind of coaching across the board for small businesses as well. So I would say that, if you could just look out for us on our website. We're going to have a landing page up soon, and it's going to be all about how we're going to help teach people on the in our customer base and their employees. And we don't really care who attends this. Whoever needs this information, or whoever thinks it could be beneficial to them, we want people to show up and learn about behaviors, skills that are actually tied to behaviors and not just functional skills.
Excellent. Love that. Check out the WagePoint website. Continue to follow up for new, bigger, better solutions that will help everyone and help people understand what leadership is and how to be a good leader, but also how to grow a successful business. Shrad, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to have you back and to chat a little bit more, because I think you and I could chat leadership all day, and people might be sick of us at that point. So it's good to split this up a little bit. But guys, this has been the Wealthy Entrepreneur Podcast. We've been talking with Shrad about mastering leadership and culture, a conversation with the CEO of WagePoint. And hopefully this has been super insightful. If you found anything that's insightful, leave a comment, give us a follow. Make sure you're available for the next week's podcast. We release every single week, talking about finances, leadership, how to build a successful company, more on culture. Whatever that looks like, we will continue to evolve that out to help you as a business owner. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing some of the insights that Shrad shared today, make sure you share this with them. We want to help as many people as possible understand and be successful leaders. Thank you all so much for joining us this week. Shrad, once again, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.